the start of any of this work begins with awareness. It begins with understanding what is happening in society and how and to what extent these forms of inequality and discrimination are affecting your employees, both at an individual level and their psychological and social well-being, all the way to their performance and what your organization looks like as a whole. Moving from the awareness phase is, of course, then identifying the problem within your organization. To what extent have you all addressed and openly discussed these things as a collective? Do you have certain structures and processes or roles in place that employees feel that they can go to, or resources that they may access? And then from there, there's this constant refinement of the process and really starting again, because new issues are going to keep emerging as we move forward as a society and try to address as much of it as possible. I do see a lot of energy right now focused on the awareness piece. There's been an uptick in the collection of books and resources at a granular level for individuals, and also more open dialogues and forums having occurring inside of companies, I should say. There hasn't been as much movement in my purview on the experimentation and learning piece. We've seen new positions opening up. There's lots of chief diversity officers being appointed to organizations right now. There are goals tied to recruitment practices and how many people of color we want to see represented in senior leadership. What I have not yet seen are companies trying something new, that we are going to experiment with a new system, a new recruitment model, a new promotion system, and evaluate how successful was this initiative? What did we learn from this process, and what might we do differently? That's what I would like to see more energy and attention being focused in companies right now. And I think a lot of the research on organizational behavior and behavioral science would be very helpful. I think it all honestly comes down to this notion of comfort that we have in the workplace. Oftentimes when we think about conversations around race, or one of the first things that comes up is, this is going to be an uncomfortable conversation. But why? Why does it have to be uncomfortable? And who is it uncomfortable for? And can we create the type of work environment where everyone feels a little uncomfortable, but by doing that, we're not making one group feel overly uncomfortable at the expense of other groups' comfort? And by that, I mean, your one or two underrepresented, marginalized employees feeling that they have to look a certain way, talk a certain way, behave a certain way to avoid all the negatives that can come from being different at work. That is really creating a high sense of discomfort for them, all to make other people who don't have to worry about what they look and sound like on a day-to-day basis feel more comfortable. How might we think about discomfort as something that everyone can feel a little bit, so it takes the burden off of the few? I think that's one way that organizations can start to think about inclusion very differently, as opposed to, we have reached inclusion or we have inclusion. It's like, let's practice it. Let's see what it feels like to feel uncomfortable. One of the things I see primarily happening in healthcare spaces right now, for instance, is the race and gender of the provider having a really strong effect on the patient outcomes overall in healthcare systems. So as employers, to what extent are the provider networks that are part of the benefits package also reaching a range of people and diversity of people? There are huge health outcomes associated with Black women who are pregnant having a Black doctor, for instance. The likelihood of them surviving the birth is much higher when they have a provider who also identifies as Black. So as health insurance, benefit packages are put together, are people taking that into account? Are they aware of these problems, right, that are happening in society, this disparate impact of maternal health on Black and Latino women? And to what extent is that being factored into the offerings that they then put in place? In terms of experimentation, I'm thinking about looking at, to what extent are employees aware that they have paid time off, and who is taking it and how often? Usually employees are more likely to take paid time off when they see their managers taking time off. It becomes a normalized, acceptable behavior if other members of the organization, but particularly the senior level members of organizations, are taking advantage of, or not taking advantage of, but are using their paid time off benefits. So merely having the presence of a policy that you can take paid time off is not a guarantee that people will use it. There has to be some explicit encouragement to use these paid time off benefits. LinkedIn recently encouraged their entire workforce to take a week off of work. And it was all designed to help promote stress and mental well-being. And there was no, need for an individual to feel singled out for wanting to take time off. This was seen as a normative policy that was happening across the board. Are companies willing to, engage in such explicit directives like that? I think that would be a very interesting experiment